Okay, the JFK files, as promised, we were about to talk about them, but I thought maybe it would be better if you heard it from more of an expert on the subject than me. Larry Hancock joins us now. He's the author of the book, The Oswald Puzzle. Okay, Larry, before we get into the files, what you believe the truth to be and all that, what has been the consensus behind the JFK assassination, which still rattles us to this day?
The consensus has certainly been that it was some form of conspiracy. I think primarily it's leaned towards people associated with the CIA. Uh, there are other possibilities, organized crime in some fashion, Lyndon Baines Johnson in some fashion, but it's in recent years it's more centered around the CIA and in particular their operations group, the group that was working on anti-Castro activities. And
Okay,
that's largely because JFK had shut down so many of the anti-Castro activities. He was taking it away from the CIA, giving it to the military. A lot of dissatisfaction within the CIA about JFK, and several of their officers really considered him almost treasonous.
okay, help me understand that particular leap, because just presented that way on its face, okay, he's shutting down your department at CIA. You may be angry about it. You may go home, get drunk, scream at your wife, crying your Cheerios. But to take the leap to then assassinate the
Yeah.
president of the United States of America is quite a leap.
That is a leap. And I think that's why it needs to be qualified. Over time, people have painted with real broad brushes, like, oh, it was the CIA in general, or it was Godfathers and the mafia in general. And that's a mistake. In the CIA, there was a very particular group of people to that things were very personal to. These were CIA officers and the anti-Castro exiles that they had been working with for 3 years from before the Bay of Pigs, people that had been involved with the Bay of Pigs. These are people who have been trying to bring down the Castro regime and kill Castro. And that group included Johnny Roselli, who was had contacts with organized crime, but there was a very special group of people who had been risking their lives literally for 3 years to bring down Castro in one way or the other. And in the fall of 1963, the message came down from Washington that JFK was actually beginning covert negotiations with Fidel Castro at his request. And those Castro had literally floated the offer that he was fed up with the Russians. Uh, they'd abandoned him. He wanted to get rid of them. He was open to discussions of neutrality, accommodation with the U.S. He had reached out to JFK, and by that fall, JFK was taking it seriously enough so that he had detached State Department personnel, and they were ready to go to Cuba for direct talks with Castro. And you can imagine when these people in Miami, who were trained military operatives who have been trying to unseat Castro, they already considered JFK to have been betrayed them at the Bay of Pigs. They considered that he had turned against them with the missile crisis. This is kind of the third strike. So when they hear that everything they've been doing, the people, the friends they've lost, everything is about to go away unless JFK goes away, that was the tipping point. Very personal.
Okay, I'm sure we'll come back to that. Let's talk about the JFK files, because now we have, I think it's 63,000 pages, so it's a friggin' lot. And unless you are a much faster reader than I am, I doubt you've combed through every single document, but I'm sure you've looked at it. What have you seen? Anything that blew your skirt up?
I have looked at it, and I have some friends who are looking at it all night. So basically, what we got to understand is what we've seen so far, which is some 60,000 pages, are almost all re-releases. These are documents that already were at the National Archives. Many of them have been released 3 or 4 times. I looked at documents last night that I've seen 5 versions of before now, and they're simply being re-released with fewer redactions in most cases. There are still some redactions. Some documents are now totally unredacted. So that's good news in an historical sense. It gives us some names that we didn't have, some CIA identities, some sources, good information, and some good historical material, like Schlesinger's advice to JFK to literally take apart the CIA. And JFK was considering that. But it's good historical information, but there's certainly no smoking gun in regard to the assassination itself. And as they say, it's almost all re-releases. We may get some new documents from the FBI. They say they found 2,300 documents that they had not associated with the JFK assassination before. We haven't seen those yet. Those will be interesting. But some interesting things for me, for example, having written the Oswald puzzle, there's a lot of speculation that Oswald went to Russia as a CIA asset. They sponsored him. One of the documents I saw last night was the CIA internal document talking about how it didn't understand how Oswald had gotten to Russia through Helsinki, how he'd gone there so quickly. They were concerned about how he'd gone to Russia, coming back with a Russian wife. Certainly doesn't sound like they were behind his going or coming. So that sort of information is helpful as well, but that's not about the assassination, that's about Oswald.
Okay, so I guess something has me a little bit confused. It's not that I thought there was going to be some bombshell in this, but for 60 plus years, a bunch of documents have been kept from the American public, and president after president after president, including Donald Trump himself, has talked about releasing them, and then someone's in their ears saying, please don't, and then we finally get them, and it's just not anything that blew me away. So why the secrecy? Why wasn't this out in 1964?
Well, I think that at least maybe we can explain. It would be good to be able to explain something, right? The CIA in particular, not so much the FBI, but the CIA always said it was withholding documents because of names of people, identities of people, names of sources that might, endanger people back then or might certainly hurt their reputations. I looked at a document last night, quite a lengthy document, that listed the names of a whole series of CIA media assets. Okay. And that a lot of that had been withheld. Now, is that going to be embarrassing to the families of people who said that they were, totally objective and open journalists, to see that they have been taking information from the CIA for years and would be, and the CIA had file names for them and considered them assets? That could be embarrassing. I looked at other documents last night that talked about sources, how the CIA was getting information from the British, the Australians, how they were getting domestic information and sharing it with the FBI. Those are all things that certainly at that time could have been embarrassing for individuals, but could have compromised programs. Another thing that we saw was actually names of people in some of the CIA operations, names of people in some of these Cuban operations. We knew about the operations before. We didn't know exactly who was involved. Now we can see who was involved, what their cryptonyms were, really trace their activities. Might that shock some of their relatives who might even still be in Cuba? To know, that their relatives had been actively operating. There are also documents that show list of Castro supporters, Cuban intelligence personnel, and we're seeing true names. So to some extent, that is related to individuals and their roles, maybe to living relatives. That's the closest I can see to explain the redactions up to date.
Okay, now let's talk about Lee Harvey Oswald, because you wrote the book on it. Who was this guy? Do you believe, was he being controlled by somebody? Look, I like you mentioned in the beginning, everyone has a theory. If you asked my old man, may God rest his soul, he swore to the day he died that Lyndon Johnson killed JFK. If you ask me, I'd tell you I think the mob worked with the CIA to kill JFK, but I don't know. I just know what I read. What do you think?
I can tell you more about Oswald. One of the reasons I can tell you more about Oswald is he talked a lot. He did have friends, contrary to what you might be led to believe. He had friends that he talked about politics and international relations with, even in the Marines. He wrote a lot. In 1963, he was writing a lot about what he thought the world should be like. He was very much in favor of economic justice, the availability of medical care, racial justice. So we get a lot of insight into what he said. He was interviewed on TV, he was interviewed on radio, he wrote a lot. So we have good insights with him. And in the book, we offer a very contrarian picture to what you get in the Warren Commission and to some JFK conspiracy. Uh, Basically, the first two-thirds of the book is what we consider a solid biography of Oswald as an individual. You know, just set aside speculation. This is his real history. The last third of the book is what we see as a scenario, speculation on our part, but we think pretty solid, of how he was set up by people who engaged with him in New Orleans that summer, uh, anti-Castro exiles who were representing themselves as pro-Castro and essentially hooked into a situation where he was essentially available to be framed as part of the assassination, pointing to Castro, because the people that carried out the assassination not only wanted to kill JFK, they wanted to point it towards Castro. And for the parties that were directly involved, we're told that that would stimulate the U.S. to attack Cuba and eliminate Castro. Later on, I've talked to some people of their families. They felt that they were misled in that part, but that's another story. Oswald's a very unique individual. So we think we can give a perspective that you didn't get in the Warren Commission, who had to paint him as a loner. They had to paint him as asocial, violent, radical, and that's not what you see in the real Oswald. They needed to do that because they could come up with no motive. Everybody they talked to about he and JFK said, yeah, he talked positively about JFK. He said JFK was maybe the only president who could deal with Khrushchev and reach some sort of detente and avoid war. So the Warren Commission was really hard pressed to present him with any kind of motive. So they essentially had to adjust the picture of him as someone who could be considered a lone nut, which he was neither. He was not lone. He was not a nut. His IQ tested at 118, very bright, and he's one of the best spoken, and actually his Marine officers complained that he could talk geopolitics about as well as they could in the Marines. And this is a Marine officer who graduated in political science from Georgetown.
Okay, so Jack Ruby, I can't let you go without asking about Jack Ruby, because that's always the thing, right? You have this Dallas area strip club owner who most people, I guess a lot of people don't realize this. At one point in time, he was an enforcer, a leg breaker for Meyer Lansky's Jewish mob. So he had mafia ties, Italian mob, Jewish mob all over the place. He got filled up with patriotic fervor all of a sudden? But where do you explain Jack Ruby to me?
Yeah, I can do that. Almost do that for change. Okay, you mentioned Meyer Lansky. Jack Ruby was connected to Lansky's casino activities in Cuba before the Castro Revolution. He actually was a FBI criminal witness in gun running to Cuba. Jack Ruby had a lot of Cuban connections, but the most important was to a fellow named Johnny Roselli. Johnny Roselli was basically a consultant. He was mentored by Lansky. He had gone to Cuba to run Lansky's casinos and straighten up things in Cuba. He was very important because he was trusted by Godfathers. He placed money for them. He got talent for them. His business card said strategist. I gotta love that. Roselli had a direct connection based in Cuba to Jack Ruby. And we can paint a pretty concrete trail that actually Roselli was used as a cutout. Roselli was part of this same team that I talked about before that had been working to first poison Castro, then attack him with rifle teams. He'd been in this same team that had been trying to kill Castro and overthrow his regime for some 3 years with the CIA officers that had been involved. And he was brought into the plot because they were comfortable with him and because they specifically could provide him a deniable connection into Dallas to get a field guy on the ground who knew dirty cops, who knew how to get information inside Dallas about the motorcade route to could support this team in Dallas. And we pretty much have that laid out as to how Roselli served as the cutout using Jack Ruby and how Jack Ruby was brought in as field support to this team that went to Dallas for the assassination.
Totally fascinating. I can't wait to read the book. Thank you so much, sir. It is the Oswald. Go read the book, The Oswald Puzzle. I would thank you for coming to my YouTube channel, but I know how brilliant it is, and I know you love it here. So subscribe and watch. We're going to start really ramping things up and putting some funny stuff, some interesting stuff out there, some collaborations. Either way, my YouTube channel is officially the place to be. So stick around.